Parents, have you ever heard anything creepy or unexplainable through your baby monitor? It's Em. Enjoy today's video. Story 1. Hopefully this fits well enough because it was a baby monitor that set it off. Okay, so my daughter is now almost 2 and has long since moved into her own room. We have one of those video monitor things where you can see and hear the baby on this little TV thing, or you can turn the picture off and just get sound. So one night, maybe a month ago, I'm sitting in bed, scrolling through Reddit or something, and I start hearing my daughter babbling to herself. Now it's really late, like 1 or 2 in the morning, much later than she's ever awake unless something is wrong and she is sick or cutting a tooth or something. So I turn the picture on the monitor on and see her standing up in her crib, facing sort of diagonally away from the camera. I can see her hands in front of her, but only like half of her face. Now is a good time to mention that we have been teaching her ASL since she was almost 3 months old, and she's been responding and conversing in sign since about 10 months. I can see her signing things like nice and silly and fun, and oddly enough, no, don't like, and bear. Of course, being the good and loving mother I am, and really not wanting to deal with an overly sleepy baby in the morning, I get up to see what the heck she's doing. When I get to her room, she is still standing up and is signing and babbling towards the far corner of her room. I ask her what she's doing and who she is talking to, and she signs/says, as best as she can, friend, which she does with her whole hand and not just her index finger, and signs bear again. I tell her that no, see bear, who is actually one of her stuffed toys, is in bed behind her, not in the corner of the room. But she just giggles at me and signs and says silly and mommy. I can see she's wide awake, so I sit down on her rocker next to her bed and try to figure out what woke her up. But all she will tell me is friend and bear, and occasionally duck down, like she is hiding and making shh noises. I finally got fed up and asked her who friend bear is, and her response literally gave me chills. Because she doesn't speak well yet, but she managed to say very clearly, and with the most serious face a 20-month-old can pull off, no name, no name, shh. OP then edited. Well, now I am well and truly freaked out, so I tell her to ask no name friend bear to go home, because it is too late to play, and I did what any good-loving mother would do. I gave her a pacifier, went back to my room, and turned off the monitor entirely, and hid under the covers in my room, where my good and loving husband would protect me from nameless invisible bears. No Name Friend Bear honestly sounds like something out of a horror movie, and I am not here for it. Maybe consider having someone to come and clean the house, or move your daughter's room, if you can. Story 2. I guess this would be the best place to leave my baby monitor story. My family used to have a baby monitor set up at the top of our stairs, so that when myself or my brother were downstairs on the family computer, my mom wouldn't have to yell at us to come upstairs. She could simply talk at a normal level, near the monitor, and we would know to come up. It was really handy, actually. Anyways, one night I am home alone as my parents are at my brother's hockey game, and I'm downstairs on the computer playing Roller Coaster Tycoon. The monitor was always on full volume, and as a kid, anytime I would hear a crack or a noise, I would obviously stop playing and listen carefully. Well, on this particular night, I heard a bang. Nothing that was too startling, kinda sounded like a cupboard door shutting. I paused my game and stared at the monitor. I then heard my front door unlock. The door didn't open, I just heard it simply unlock. My heart dropped. It was eerily quiet. After about 10 seconds after the door unlocked, I heard a massive loud bang, like someone stomping on the hardwood upstairs, and the baby monitor went to loud static. I immediately started crying and hid under the computer desk for an hour before my parents came home. When my parents got home, they asked me if I had let anyone in, because the door was unlocked. I explained what happened, but they couldn't figure anything out. There was nothing taken. Then the baby monitor was still plugged in, and there are no signs of anyone else being in the house. To this day, thinking about that night gives me chills. Too long, didn't read, heard a bang, cried like a baby. Look, Opie, I don't blame you. I would have cried too. I think my thinking would have been more about just trying to get out of the house ASAP. Story 3. Not me, but my grandmother tells this story pretty often whenever any sort of ghost conversation comes up. My parents moved into this old house in Connecticut when my brother was a baby and my oldest brother was about 10. I was not bored yet. The house was pretty haunted, to the point that to this day, my oldest brother won't talk about it. After several weeks of finding him sleeping in the hallway outside my parents' door, they decided maybe he needed a little vacation. At this point, my parents were in denial about their undead housemates, so they didn't mention my older brother's behavior to my grandmother. who agreed to watch my middle brother while my parents took him to Disney World. The first night my grandmother stayed at the house, she saw a woman talking about my brother through the monitor. Then she heard some faint singing. Wanting it to be something logical, my grandmother assumed she left the TV on in the bedroom. My brother's crib was in my parents' room. She went up there, no TV, no radio, just my infant brother laughing at absolutely nothing. My grandmother basically spent the rest of the week terrified and wouldn't go back to our house after my parents returned. She had some other strange things happen, but notes the baby monitor talk is one of the scariest experiences she's ever had. My parents stuffed out that house for about a year, until one day all the china came flying out of the china cabinet. My mom says she's never packed and gotten out of a house that fast. They stayed in a hotel until they sold it. Somebody commented, "I blame no one but myself for clicking this thread at this time of night." See, finally some people that I can actually get behind. Scary crap happens, and then they get all their stuff together and just go. This is how people in horror movies need to act. Story 4. My parents told me of the ghost of the little white house when I was about 13 or 14. The whole conversation started with some talk of ghost. I'm not exactly sure how, but it led to my mom telling me of the ghost nanny that I used to have as a baby. She told me that although I never cried much, the nights I would start crying, they would awaken to the crying over the baby monitor. This would be quickly followed by the sound of the rocking chair in my bedroom rocking, and I would stop crying. She told me that they would often come into my room and find bottles that neither of them had given me. The creepiest story she told me was the story of my almost death. One of my grandmothers was supposed to be watching me because both my parents were at work, but she was doing something or left. Not a great grandmother, but I had apparently become wrapped up in my blanket and was beginning to suffocate. Well, about the same time my other grandmother, fantastic grandma, got this strange feeling that she needed to check on me. And apparently the feeling was so strong that she left work and came to the house to find me just in time so that I didn't die. My mother surely believed in it, and it was a pretty convincing story when she told it. At the end of the story, she told me that right before we moved into our new home, she thanked the ghost for all that it had done for the family and for keeping me safe. Somebody commented, "I'm gonna pretend all of the ITT stories are like this." Story 5. This isn't something I heard from my kid's room, but it was something creepy heard over a baby monitor. I did at-home care for a little while, and there was this one client I had a couple of years ago. The lady I assisted had dementia, and she was just at that point where the good days were fading. We had a baby monitor in her room so we could hear when she was waking up. I'll go ahead and mention that we also had bells pinned to her sheets so that when she was trying to get up on her own, fall risk, we would hear the bells jingle. It was common to hear her down in her room talking to that man, asking, "Who are you and what is it?" to an empty room. One evening, her and I were in the living room together by ourselves, and I heard the bells start jiggling on their own over the baby monitor. There was no ceiling fan. The AC or heat wasn't running. No windows were open. I always had bad feelings in her house, with things like cabinets opening and one really creepy time, where it sounded like footsteps coming down the hallway, which really scared me. I'm honestly glad I will never have to go into that house again. Somebody commented, "There is something terrifying about the idea of having dementia and being able to see ghosts because of it. That would be a confusing place to be." I did elderly care for a little one summer, and this was a very common experience I had with really late set dementia. I would be terrified staying at their house until 11 p.m. when they would go to bed at 8 p.m., and I would hear them randomly wake up at 10 and just have a full conversation alone. Then I go in the room and ask who they were talking to, and they just turn and stare at me like I was blind. Story 6. I was at a friend's house one night and she was putting her little boy to bed. Her baby monitor had a camera built in and was installed at the foot of the crib. She also had one of those mattress sensors in the crib. Well, we're sitting down, watching a movie, and the receiver for the monitor is on the coffee table in front of us. The sound sensor spikes and the screen goes white. She picks it up and all you can make out on the screen is an eerie face. We go running into the room and her kid is sound asleep. We look around and don't see anything strange. So we go back to the movie. About 10 minutes later, the same thing happened. I get up quietly and sneak into his room, while she stays on the couch. I catch the kid standing up in his crib with his face right up against the monitor. He's smiling like crazy and giggling. He looks over at me and quickly lays down and acts like he is asleep. I let her know what's up and she laughs it off. A few nights later, she tells me the same thing happened to the monitor, but her boy was sitting on the couch next to her at the time. Somebody commented, "Just when I thought it was going to end on a normal note." Jesus. Story 7. I used to babysit 2 kids, and they each had a video monitor that picked up sound. I put them to bed and was sitting downstairs just doing homework. and I thought they were both asleep because it had been like a half hour since I'd put them in bed, and neither kid was shifting around anymore. It was silent except for their breathing through the monitors. It was pitch black outside and the parents wouldn't be home for another couple of hours. All of a sudden, I hear a little kid singing. I couldn't tell what the voice was saying, but it sounded really creepy. I looked at the monitors and neither kid had moved. Went up to their rooms and checked on them both. Apparently, the younger one, 3 years old, would sing to himself when he couldn't sleep, and his mom didn't tell me that. He was laying perfectly still singing softly, and I nearly crapped myself when I heard it through the monitor. Somebody commented, "That's incredibly adorable, but completely terrifying to live through." Story 8. When my daughter was about 8 months old, I was in her bedroom cleaning while she was playing in her crib. I heard her monitor turn down, but when I noticed the red lights moving, signaling noise, I turned it up. I heard plain as day a child screaming something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, no, please no." The worst part is that I could actually hear him being hit. Not slapped, but seriously beat. I lived in a heavily populated area of Pittsburgh, so there was no telling where this was happening. I grabbed my daughter and ran outside anyway, hoping to hear the child scream from an apartment or house, so I could call the police, but I couldn't zero in on it. Such a horrible feeling, not being able to stop this poor child from being beaten. I never looked at any of my neighbors the same. Someone commented, "The ghost stories don't bother me, but that is horrifying. That would surely haunt me for a good while." This was such an unexpected sad story compared to everything else we've been reading so far. I would much rather read a story about a ghost or something than stuff like this that really makes you feel hopeless. Story 9. On a less creepy note, I was accidentally responsible for my boss hearing terrifying sounds through a kid's baby monitor. My boss's kid was born in 2005, and The Grudge was still kind of a big deal, especially with the sequel approaching. I taught the kid how to make that creepy voice clicky sound. She liked to mimic, and it was pretty hilarious to hear her do it. Unfortunately, she decided to bust it out around 1 o'clock in the morning at one point, and it terrified the crap out of my boss and her husband. I got frick you texts in the early hours of the morning for like a month. And then again, when I taught her the chorus of Never Gonna Give You Up. For a while, it was a toss-up as to whether they'd wake up to creepy ghost sounds or annoying songs. They were less than pleased. Somebody commented, "You rickrolled them with their own baby. Genius." Story 10. My uncle has a handful of stories, but I'll tell one of the better ones. One night, over the baby monitor, they heard whispering in what sounded like my cousin's voice. Strangely, though, they heard another voice that sounded like my grandma's. She passed a year before this. They go into her room and ask her who she was talking to, and she says, "I was talking to Grandma. She helped me find my doll." The doll was on the floor, but when they checked on her, it was in her crib. I could go on for a while with other stories if anyone is interested. Story 11. This doesn't quite fit, but one time my friend and I were chilling in his garage, and his baby was asleep in his crib inside. Then we hear static from the baby monitor, followed by this really creepy, raspy voice whispering, "I've come for the child." Turns out it was just my friend's brother who'd walked in the front door of the house. He had a key, and upon realizing we were out in the garage, thought he'd freak us out a little. It worked. Somebody commented, "Thank goodness. The one explainable sane story in this poop storm of madness." Yeah, while I get this might have been terrifying for OP and the friend, I'm thankful that it was just a joke and we know what happened. Honestly, it seems like something my brother would do. Story 12. Heard a strange hissing noise at 3:30 a.m. through the monitor, and our movement pad went off. Walked into the room, and he was fast asleep. He proceeded to wake up the next morning and tell me that for the last few sleeps he has been picked up and flown to a place in Ireland where his 6 brothers and sister live. He managed to name them, and they remain the same each time I ask him about it. Safe to say, me and his mother are slightly scared. Somebody commented, "This reminds me of a corrupt Peter Pan." Story 13. I don't have kids yet, but apparently when I was little, my parents heard an indistinguishable mumbling coming from my room on a weekly basis. That was blatantly a man's voice. These were the same nights as when my toys would turn on and start playing music in the middle of the night. I have no idea if this is true or not, but for as long as I knew her, my grandmother used to say that my grandfather, he passed away when I was just over a year old, was always watching over me. Story 14. We were at a party where my friend and his wife went to check on the baby, who was sleeping upstairs. It turned out they forgot the baby monitor downstairs on the table. As it is voice activated, it turned on when they entered the room and transmitted their conversation to everyone, including the part where the wife agreed to a quick BJ. We were polite and switched off the baby monitor, but their face was priceless when they came back downstairs and noticed the baby monitor on the table. Ugh, ew. Look, I get it. We all have needs, and sometimes those needs are a little pressing, but I would never do that when I have guests over. Just foul. Like, I think you can wait a couple hours, people. Story 15. Yes, it was creepy when it happened until I figured out what it was. I have a son, and he wasn't even talking yet when I heard the alphabet sung by a girl through his monitor. It scared me, and I went and got my sister, and we sat there and heard it again. We live across the street from a daycare. It was creepy until I remembered that. Somebody commented, yeah, a haunted daycare with a little girl that died there. Story 16. When my oldest sister was a baby, my mom had just put her down for a nap and went to wash dishes. She had the baby monitor on the counter by the sink. Her then husband was at work, so she was home alone. After a while, she heard a man's voice coming through singing a lullaby. No one was in the nursery. Story 17. My daughter's toys come on by themselves. When she was little, less than a year old, I've always blamed it on faulty batteries because this is what keeps me from pooping my pants. Somebody commented, something similar happened to my cousin in the middle of the night, but when she went to turn it off, she saw there were no batteries. Yeah, I hear about stuff like this happening all the time. At least they weren't Furbies. Those were the scariest toys I have ever seen to this day. Story 18. Back when all baby monitors transmitted on 49 MHz, I used to talk to them with a higher powered radio I modified to transmit on those same frequencies. I'm sure some parents freaked out over that. I was a weird kid. Someone commented, all other stories explained by this. Story 19. I hate baby monitors. This thread confirms my suspicion that baby monitors are nothing but into heck portals. Somebody commented, dang frickin' right. Story 20. Baby breathing heavily all of a sudden. That's the worst feeling. This one just sounds honestly much more scary. A feeling like your kid is sick than a fear of ghosts or anything. Kind of like what I said about the story where OP heard a kid shouting. These are the real-life occurrences that I think cause true panic. Story 21. My husband went upstairs to put my son to sleep. He came back down and we started watching a movie. The window was open and we could faintly hear our outside dog barking 2 houses down. I looked over the video monitor in night vision mode and saw my son standing up and a woman walk in and pick him up. He gladly went with her. I was just in disbelief. Told husband to go check. He went up there and kiddo was lying there. Like, trying to sleep here, what's your deal? He came back down and we just kind of sat there dumbfounded until we heard the neighbor's dog barking again, but on the baby monitor in our son's room. Took us about an hour to finally realize they had the same monitor as us, and we were watching their kid's room. Somebody commented, I don't know what's scarier. The terror of seeing something like that with all the initial confusion, or the fact that people can apparently watch your child's room if they just have the same monitor. Story 22. Based on this thread alone, I have decided that before I have kids, I need to be rich so I can build a brand new house and hire a nanny to literally be with the baby 24/7. This way, no dead grandpas can make noises in the kids' room and I don't have to deal with the little heck portals. Someone then commented, you could build on top of an Indian burial ground. Then that would ruin everything. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.